For 30 years, Johnny Carson was more than just a talk show host. He was America's late-night companion. Night after night, millions tuned in to The Tonight Show to laugh, unwind, and feel like they were sitting in the living room with a trusted friend. Carson's perfect comedic timing, his Midwestern charm, and that famous golf swing made him a household name. But what most people never realized was how private the man behind the desk truly was. To the public, Johnny was polished, professional, and untouchable. He rarely let his emotions slip on camera, and he kept his personal life locked behind a curtain. Even though he welcomed over 22,000 guests during his reign, only a handful ever got close to the real Johnny Carson. Those few weren't just booked celebrities. They were his favorites. The ones who made Johnny lower his guard, laugh a little harder, and even on rare occasions, reveal a flash of genuine emotion. And it's in Johnny's final words to those guests that we discover the man he really was. Behind the cool facade, these moments, sometimes on stage, sometimes whispered backstage, show us what Johnny valued most: respect for the craft, spontaneity, authenticity, and genuine connection. In this video, we're looking at 5 legendary figures who weren't just guests, but confidants: Bob Hope, Dean Martin, George Burns, Lucille Ball, and Jack Benny. Together, they paint a rare portrait of the real Carson, his humor, his humility, and the deep admiration he carried for the icons who shaped entertainment long before and alongside him. These weren't just interviews. These were moments of legacy, the kind that revealed Johnny's heart when the cameras stopped rolling. Bob Hope was more than just a comedian. He was an institution. By the time Johnny Carson took over The Tonight Show in 1962, Hope had already spent decades dominating radio, film, and television. He had entertained troops overseas, perfected the one-liner, and built a reputation as one of America's most dependable, funny men. For Johnny, who grew up watching Hope, there was a kind of reverence baked in from the start. When Bob Hope walked onto the stage, Carson knew he was standing across from living comedy history. But behind the curtain, Johnny's feelings were far more complicated. By the 1970s and 80s, Hope's style of comedy, tight cue card setups, scripted jokes, and rapid-fire punchlines, felt increasingly out of step with the casual, conversational style Carson had mastered. Staff members later recalled how Johnny quietly struggled through Hope's appearances. The segments were rehearsed to the point of rigidity, leaving little room for spontaneity. And spontaneity was exactly what Johnny believed made late night magic. Still, Carson never let the audience see that tension. On camera, he treated Bob Hope like comedy royalty. The deference was obvious. He leaned in, he smiled, he let Hope dominate the conversation. Whatever private doubts Johnny carried, he knew the viewers at home deserved to see a legend treated with respect. To them, Bob Hope wasn't just another guest. He was a piece of Americana, and Johnny was careful never to tarnish that image. Their final meeting on The Tonight Show was a masterclass in Carson's restraint. The public saw the reverence, the warm laughter, and the professional courtesy. But according to crew members who witnessed what happened backstage afterward, Johnny's parting words revealed a more personal truth. He reportedly told Hope, "Thanks for everything, Bob. You never missed, ever." That single line captured the paradox of Carson's feelings. He may have felt Hope's style was stuck in the past, but he couldn't deny the man's consistency, his reliability, his absolute professionalism. In decades of appearances, Hope always delivered exactly what was promised, and Johnny respected that more than almost anything. It was a rare moment where his final words summed up not just a relationship, but his entire philosophy. You didn't have to be his favorite style of performer to earn his admiration. You just had to show up, do the work, and never let the audience down. If Bob Hope represented discipline and structure, Dean Martin was the complete opposite. Dean floated through life with a drink in one hand, a grin on his face, and a mischievous sparkle in his eye. On stage, he played the role of the happy-go-lucky drunk who didn't take anything too seriously. But that persona, carefully crafted and brilliantly performed, was exactly what made him so magnetic to both audiences and Johnny Carson. Whenever Dean Martin appeared on The Tonight Show, something changed in Johnny. The usually precise and tightly controlled host seemed to loosen his grip, letting the chaos unfold. Martin might stumble past his chair, forget his lines on purpose, or crack jokes that veered far from the plan. And rather than steering the conversation back on course, Johnny leaned into it, often laughing harder than the audience itself. Dean's unpredictability brought out Carson's rare, playful side, a version of Johnny that viewers almost never saw. Behind the scenes, Carson admitted that he admired how Dean could break the rules without ever looking like he was trying. While other guests came armed with carefully rehearsed stories, Martin breezed in with nothing more than his charm, and somehow he always stole the show. It was effortless, and Johnny, who spent hours preparing every night to appear so natural, quietly envied that kind of freedom. During Martin's final appearance, the affection between the two men was undeniable. As Dean got up to leave, Johnny reportedly told him, "Don't change, Dino." The world needs at least one guy who never takes it seriously. It was more than just a farewell line. It was Carson admitting that he saw something in Dean he wished he could embody himself. Dean Martin represented the opposite of Johnny's carefully managed persona, and maybe that's why their chemistry worked so well. Dean gave Carson permission to relax, to laugh without restraint, to remember that not everything had to be perfect. In a career built on precision and professionalism, Dean Martin was the reminder that sometimes the best television moments came from simply letting go. If Dean Martin brought out Carson's playful side, George Burns tapped into something deeper, Johnny's respect for history. Burns wasn't just a guest, he was a living link to vaudeville, the golden age of comedy that had shaped generations of performers. By the time he appeared on The Tonight Show in his later years, Burns was well into his 90s, yet he still carried the sharp wit and timing that had made him a star decades earlier. Unlike with most guests, Johnny approached these interviews differently. Crew members remembered how Carson would actually prepare more extensively for Burns, reviewing his history, carefully planning thoughtful questions, and treating the appearance almost like a masterclass. With George Burns, Johnny wasn't just the host, he was the student. He knew he was sitting across from someone who had seen comedy evolve from smoky vaudeville theaters to radio, film, and now late-night television. And Johnny's admiration showed. On air, his comments were warm and deferential. During one of Burns' final appearances, Carson famously told him, "George, you're the only guy I know who gets funnier every year." It was both a compliment and a truth. Even in his 90s, Burns was creating fresh material, proving that age wasn't a limitation, but another tool in the act. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly reflected on how Burns gave him hope about his own future. Johnny saw in George a blueprint for longevity, a man who wasn't recycling old routines or coasting on reputation, but still reinventing himself to connect with audiences. That kind of commitment resonated deeply with Carson, who was always conscious of how comedy was shifting under his feet. For Johnny, George Burns wasn't just another celebrity to interview. He was proof that the art of comedy could outlast generations, and that staying relevant meant staying curious, adaptable, and sharp. In Burns, Carson found both a mentor and an inspiration, a reminder that comedy wasn't about age or era. It was about keeping the craft alive. If George Burns was comedy's elder statesman, Lucille Ball was its queen. By the time she appeared on The Tonight Show, Lucy had already transformed television forever with I Love Lucy. She wasn't just a star, she was television royalty. And when she sat across from Johnny Carson, the energy in the room shifted. This wasn't a typical host and guest dynamic. It was two titans of TV sharing the same stage, equals in every sense. Crew members and writers often said Johnny treated Lucy differently. With most celebrities, he kept a professional barrier, never fully revealing himself. But with Lucille Ball, the wall lowered. Their conversations felt warmer, more genuine, almost like two colleagues trading stories after years in the business. Johnny respected her not only for her pioneering role as a performer, but also for her behind-the-scenes work. Lucy wasn't just the face of her shows. She was a powerhouse who had helped build Desilu Productions, shaping the future of American television. On air, their chemistry was undeniable. Lucy's quick wit and Johnny's dry humor played perfectly together, but it was backstage where Carson revealed his truest feelings. Multiple staff members recalled him leaning in and telling her, "You're the real deal, Lucy." Always were. It was a rare personal compliment from a man who almost never voiced such things privately, let alone in public. When Lucille Ball passed away in 1989, Carson broke another one of his rules. He rarely let personal emotions enter his show, keeping The Tonight Show light and detached. But for Lucy, he made an exception. He dedicated a heartfelt segment to her memory, speaking openly about her influence and legacy. For viewers, it was one of the only times Johnny set aside the entertainer's mask and allowed himself to be vulnerable on camera. For Carson, Lucille Ball wasn't just a guest. She was a peer, an equal, who had reshaped the very medium they both thrived in. His respect for her was deeper than admiration. It was recognition. Lucy was proof that talent, grit, and relentless innovation could leave an imprint on television that would outlast them both. And Johnny wanted to make sure the world knew it. If Lucille Ball was Carson's equal, Jack Benny was his teacher. Of all the comedians who sat across from Johnny, Benny's influence was the most profound. Long before Carson ever dreamed of hosting The Tonight Show, he was studying Jack Benny's timing, the way he could make an audience laugh without even saying a word, just by pausing, raising an eyebrow, or letting the silence stretch. Carson often credited Benny as the single biggest influence on his career, and it showed whenever Jack appeared on the show. Normally, Johnny maintained complete control of the pacing and rhythm of his interviews, but with Benny, he stepped back. He set up jokes, waited patiently, and allowed Jack to shine. It was the rare moment when the host became the student again, and viewers could see Johnny's admiration written all over his face. Colleagues later recalled that after Benny's final Tonight Show appearance, Carson told him privately, "You taught me how to listen." It was a simple line, but it revealed the depth of Johnny's gratitude. He had built his entire late-night empire not on dominating conversations, but on reacting, on letting guests and moments breathe. That skill, perhaps more than anything else, had made him the greatest talk show host of his era. And it was a lesson learned directly from Jack Benny. Friends said Carson would often talk about how Benny showed him that silence could be funnier than any punchline. A perfectly timed pause could make a whole room erupt in laughter. That ability to hold back, to not rush the joke, became one of Johnny's trademarks. And it all traced back to Jack Benny's masterclass in restraint. For Carson, Benny wasn't just a guest. He was a legend who had shaped his entire philosophy of comedy. Their exchanges weren't just interviews, they were tributes, subtle acknowledgments of a mentor whose lessons had carried Johnny to the very top. And in his final words to Benny, Carson gave credit where it was due, honoring the man who had taught him that sometimes the funniest thing you can do is simply wait. Across 3 decades, Johnny Carson welcomed more than 22,000 guests onto The Tonight Show. Yet when you look closely, it's the rare few, like Bob Hope, Dean Martin, George Burns, Lucille Ball, and Jack Benny, who reveal the man behind the curtain. These weren't just celebrities passing through a talk show. They were the people Johnny truly admired, the ones who managed to break through his famously guarded demeanor. From Bob Hope, he showed us how to separate personal preference from professional respect. From Dean Martin, he learned that spontaneity and laughter mattered more than polish. George Burns reminded him that comedy was an art you could keep perfecting, no matter how old you became. Lucille Ball stood as proof that television could be built, reinvented, and ruled with both brilliance and grit. And Jack Benny, the teacher, instilled in him the power of restraint, the art of listening, and the courage to let silence carry a joke. Together, these 5 icons shaped not only Johnny's career, but his values. They pulled back the layers of the television host and revealed a man who cared deeply about authenticity, craftsmanship, and connection. In his final words to them, sometimes playful, sometimes deeply heartfelt, we hear echoes of what mattered most to him: respect for the work, admiration for the craft, and gratitude for the people who made the journey worthwhile. Johnny Carson may have been the consummate professional, the man who kept his emotions in check and his personal life in the shadows. But with these legends, he let the mask slip, if only for a moment. And in those moments, we didn't just see the king of late night. We saw Johnny, the man who laughed, learned, and loved the company of those rare few who truly understood what it meant to make people smile. And that's the real legacy of Johnny Carson. Beyond the laughter, beyond the fame, it was the quiet moments, the parting words, the backstage whispers that told us who he really was. A man who valued respect, who admired authenticity, and who never forgot the people who shaped him along the way. But now I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 legends do you think had the greatest impact on Johnny Carson and on comedy itself? Was it Bob Hope, the pioneer? Dean Martin, the effortless cool? George Burns, the timeless craftsman? Lucille Ball, the queen of television? Or Jack Benny, the teacher who showed him the power of silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading what you think. And if you enjoyed this trip through late night history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the golden age of television. Until next time, thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful words are the ones we almost never hear.